Hello guys, welcome back to our channel. In the last video we talked about shading and lighting and how to understand the light source, the direction of the light source, and how it affects our object that we want to draw. And today we are going to take like few examples as we did last time, but today we are going to like showcase how to shade an object from A to Z, like the full process. So I will try to not make it a long video, just to deliver the whole process, how it looks like, and so on. So for example, if we take this sphere as an example, as I showed you last time, we can start assuming the light direction is coming from this area. So this surfaces is gonna be the brightest in our object, and these areas are going to be the darkest. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that this area should be completely dark. I'm gonna explain why. So we can start with adding some few dark lines here. So I'm gonna use the cross hash technique in this video, using like not only one direction line but two directions. It's kind of like creating this kind of cross looking lines, you know. So because this is the technique I used to use, but of course you're gonna pick up any techniques that you want. So the technique, of course, are explained in the previous video. Feel free to check it out if you want. So I'm gonna just proceed with the lighting, adding some more dark areas here, maybe crack it up a little bit. I'm using P14, which is like, sorry, now you can see it. So I'm using P14, which is like kind of like too much to start with, honestly speaking, but maybe we can lower it down a little bit by using P4. Yeah, let's go with it. So once you understand the lighting, you will notice that even though the light is coming from this area, it doesn't necessarily mean that this area should be completely black. Why I left like kind of like a bright tone here? Because physically speaking, when it comes to like the real world, light bounces when they hit surfaces. So for example, what I mean by that, when the light, for example, if I have a sphere here, right? If I have a sphere and the light is coming from this area, so this light is hitting the ground and bouncing back to the objects that exist in this environment. So what I mean by that, so the light, when the light goes from this direction and hits a surface and bounce back, it actually affects the surfaces that are existing in the environment, which means this part of this sphere is gonna be a little bit bright because of the light bounces that is caused by this light. And that's why when we have a light source, like going back to our example here, when we have a light source, it doesn't necessarily mean again that this should be dark, completely dark, but it should be a little bit brighter here. Why? Because the light is bouncing. So taking that into consideration, if we are trying to achieve like the realistic look, we should take light bounce into consideration. which means there is no harm. Actually, it also makes it a little bit more realistic if we leave kind of like a bright area here, as you see. So based on that, I'm gonna try to continue adding some more darker tone, darker, and of course it's gonna start to fade out the closer I come or I get to this direction light. And as you see, it should take also the shape of the sphere. Why? Because the sphere is circle actually. It's not like taking this example, for example, when we have a light source from this direction, this surface is going to be bright, yes, and this way, this one is going to be completely black, very, very blacky. Why do we have this high contrast between surfaces 1 and 2? Because of the shape of the box. This edge is actually causing this very high contrast. But the sphere is different example. The sphere is very circular shape. It's very smooth shape. And that's why our shading should also be smooth. Which means we can make it a rule actually, is your shading, when you start to shade an object, the shading should follow the the object shape, sorry. So if it's circle, then your shading should be smoother as the sphere is. And the same applies for the box and for different objects, for all objects actually. And this is not always the scenario, of course. For example, if we take an example like sphere again, and the light, very, very strong light is coming from this direction, from the top. So your shadow is going to be very, very dark on that area, also in the bottom part, and the upper part will be brighter. And this kind of like contrast will be caused, also will be generated by this light. Why? Because the light source is way, way too strong. In this scenario, yes, you kind of like have this kind of like contrasty cut. So in this scenario, so going back to our sphere, let's assume the light is very smooth and not that strong. So based on that, our shadow should be also smooth. And to smooth out our shading, as you see, I'm using different kind of direction for my shadings line, because it actually gives us this smoothness that we need, you know. So now I notice that I don't have enough tone here, dark tone. So that's why I switched to P12, or P10 should also work. And maybe we can crack it up a little bit. I'm gonna try to speed it up a little bit. And as you see here, it doesn't matter how much dark tone I'm adding, I'm trying to keep this bright area, considering or taking the light bounce into consideration. Because physically speaking, this is very important. And when we talk about physics, we need to follow the physics rule when it comes to drawing. Otherwise, your drawing will not be realistic. So it kind of like has theory background or theory knowledge that you should be aware of. But when you combine it into your skills of drawing, you end up drawing very realistic objects. One more thing that we need to take into consideration is actually the shadow that is caused by the light. So when the light hits the surface, there is a shadow should be generated, right? Based on this shape, and the shape is sphere, so it means our shadow, physically speaking, should be like kind of like having this shape. It's kind of like an oval. Of course, it hugely depends on the light of the direction. For example, if the light is coming from this area, so from the top, it means your shadow should be like looking like this, because the light is coming from this area, from the top. It means the shadow, physically speaking, should be generated in the bottom bar. And the more angle you have into your in your light source, the shadow changes accordingly. So going back to our example, assuming the light coming from this direction, our shadow should be approximately having this shape. So the shadow should be really, really dark. Not all of it, but of course the deepest area, which is the closest to the object, should be the darkest, which actually this one. And it starts to fade out as much as I go out to this direction. Why? Because again, the light bounces. So the light bounce, or the light is causing inconsistency in our environment. Like for example, this shadow should be dark from this area, but it starts to fade out as much as they go out because of the light bounce. So the light hits this surface, then it bounces back to the top. And if we have a roof here, it bounces back to this location. So if we drew like a line to understand where the light is coming, it actually hits this surface, then bounce back to the roof, assuming we have a roof right here, and then it bounces back to the ground. And when it bounces back to the ground, it causes this, what we said about the shadow. So it starts to fade out as much as they go out. I go to this direction. So maybe we can delete a little bit, and we can start, or we can continue with our shadow. As you see here, I'm kind of like accordingly changing the pressure on my pen. Like for example, like this, start really, really hard. Then as soon as you go out, or you want to finish your line, you start to make less and less and less pressure on your pen. And this is actually what I'm using here. So I start really hard, pressing really hard on the pencil, and less pressure, and less pressure. So it's gonna look approximately like this. So the light and shadow looks pretty good actually, but I can go a little bit further by adding a little bit more details. Like for example, this area is kind of like way too big, this light area. So maybe we can reduce it a little bit. Maybe we can also highlight this line, not all of it, because the light is coming from this area, right? So the line of the sphere should not be that visible as much as here in the backside. So the backside, you can highlight it a little bit. Why? Because so this surface are in the shadow area, right? And that's why you can go a little bit with the tone, so go up with the tone. And maybe we can add a little bit an additional tone to make it really dark, you know. And I am constantly changing the line direction sometimes vertical, sometimes horizontal, and so on and so on. And this gives me the smooth feeling that I need for our sphere. See? Maybe we can reduce this line a little bit on the front, because the light is hitting this area, right? So the line should not be that hard as much as we did on the back side. This is the line of our floor. You can maybe add some highlights here, just tiny bits, especially on the back side. There is also no harm to add some light shadow on the ground. It's totally fine. If I feel that my shadow line is way too hard, the contrast, I can start to maybe fade it out a little bit by adding like an additional tone that breaks this very high contrast, you know? If you feel so it's really up to you. But yeah, this is actually how it's gonna look like. Maybe we need a little bit of shadow here in that area. And so on. So this is pretty much it. What I wanted to show you today is kind of like the same as in the previous video, what we talked about. But in this session, I just wanted to deep dive into it a little bit further to show you in details how shadowing an object from A to Z goes. And of course, this is still not perfect. I can add as much details as I want. But as I said previously at the beginning of this video, I didn't want to really make it a long video. So the main purpose is just to give you an idea how it works from A to Z and what are you able to achieve, or you are going to be able to achieve if you follow these rules one by one. And of course, in the next session, we can talk about different shape, like a cone, for example, or a box, or maybe a little bit more complex object like a tree, for example, or a cup, and so on and so on. Because the more complex your object is, the more complex or the more difficult it gets to really understand and analyze it and make a proper shadow and lighting, you know. But of course, it's doable. It's doable once you do it one by one, step by step, and to understand also the physics. Because as I said, as you saw here, it also requires some physical understanding of your object. So how or what your object is constructed of, how light light bounces in the environment, what light bounces means, and so on and so on. So this kind of knowledge combined with the drawing skill gives you this mindset and this drawing skill. This is pretty much it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, anyone can draw. Thank you very much.